Jones. I am Associate Director here at the Law Library and Co-Interim Assistant Dean. And welcome to this talk, the HLS Book Talk Series. Well, the book that we're going to talk about today is Look Again, The Power of Noticing What Was Always There by Tali Sharot and Cass Sunstein.
Make that proper.
You can get a copy of the book from the Harvard Coop, or you can check it out here at the library.
Thank you.
Now, we would like to, first of all, before we introduce our esteemed speaker, we would like to thank the Dean's Office for their generous and longstanding support of the Book Talk series. And I'd also like to thank those who have put this Book Talk series together. Primarily, Maya Bergamasco. She is our scholarly librarian, and she puts together all the book talks that the library presents for the law school. I'd also like to thank our staff, Christine Park, Juan Andres Fuentes, Debbie Ginsberg, and Sarah Wharton for their work on this Book Talk series. Today, we are joined by our author, one of the co-authors, I should say, Cass Sunstein. And normally at this time, I'd say a long, flowery who he is, his professorship, and all that jazz. But no, today I'm going to say he's a wonderful guy. He loves his students, and he writes a lot. So without further ado, Cass Sunstein.
Okay. Thanks all. It's a thrill to be able to discuss this here, and it's a particular thrill to see people in my class here. Thank you for coming. And I have lots of classes, and like professors feel excited when people sign up. So if you sign up next year, or if you just come, even if you're not in the class, that's great. Okay, this is an effort to capture a brain. Is it good? Is it kind of like a brain? Because this is about the human brain, and my co-author, Tali Sharot, is a neuroscientist. Okay, so this is from H.G. Wells, science fiction writer, who wrote a tale called The Island of Dr. Moreau. I don't know how many of you know about it. It's about a doctor named Moreau who created creatures that were like half horse and half person, or half lion and half person. And this was not comical, but terrifying. And so our narrator says 1,000 things which had seemed unnatural and repulsive speedily became natural and ordinary to me. I suppose everything in existence takes its color from the average hue of our surroundings. Take that as an early recognition of the power of habituation, which is diminishing sensitivity to stimuli. And we're going to explain that fundamental idea and its relevance to law and policy. This is an ironic slide because at my secondary school in Concord, Massachusetts, these words are displayed very visibly on a wall. From Rachel Carson, one way to open your eyes is to ask yourself, what if I had never seen this before? What if I knew I would never see it again? And those words displayed at a building that's very familiar to me, I didn't come across until very recently. I didn't notice. What she is urging is dishabituation, to be explained, and urging that the phenomenon to which Wells draws attention is regrettable. Okay. Here's from Abraham Heschel. An individual dies when they cease to be surprised. I am surprised every morning when I see the sunshine again. That's a plea for dishabituation, in that case to something amazing, which is sunshine every morning. Okay, that is an owl who is surprised and slightly alarmed about what you're about to hear. And don't bother so much with the words unless you really want to. This is a study in which a bunch of people, regular people, are asked if they'll participate in a laboratory experiment in which they can participate with a stranger who will be their teammate, and if they cooperate well, they'll make money. That's the design. But people are told, some people are told, once they arrive at the experiment, actually you'll make more money if you lie. The word lie isn't used directly, but it's clear that's what is would be the source of more money. So the setup is cooperate, money, lie, more money. People who get in the experimental setting do lie. When they lie, their brains are set up, are attached, so there's a monitor going on to see what's happening inside their head. And the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that lights up when there's emotional arousal, lights up, meaning the amygdala inside their head is saying, stop, you're lying. And we've all felt that, haven't we? When we're doing something we think to be a little bit wrong, there's a red alert in our head, and chances are the amygdala is activated. As the day goes on and the lying continues, the amygdala starts to quiet down. It starts to quiet down so much that by the end of the day, the amygdala is saying, I guess this is what we do. It's not giving a red light anymore. It's gone on to greener pastures. As people lie more, and there's a reduction in the activity of the amygdala in response to dishonesty, that is a predictor of escalation of self-serving dishonesty on the next decision. The suggestion is that people show emotional habituation to their own immorality. It's a little like H.G. Wells Encountering the Monsters. And the result of the habituation is that immorality escalates. That's a case about one's own lying and dishonesty. Notice it has implications for one's reaction to the lying and dishonesty of others. The implication is as you're confronted with, let's say, a community in which there's a lot of corruption or bribery, or in which people are dishonest or cruel, the emotional habituation will be significant and the surprise signal will quiet down. Okay, when people are on a vacation to some place that looks like this, when do you think they're having the best time of all? Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6? It turns out that 43 hours into a vacation is the peak time. That's what people describe as the most amazing of all. And it appears to be the case that the first day is really, really good, but it has an adjustment period associated with it. It's not until the second day that everything good kicks in, and after that it tends to fall off. If people are asked that's quantitative research. If people are asked qualitatively, what did you like best about your vacation? There's one word that crushes every other word. Can you guess what it is? First. The first time I saw the beach. The first time I went to the hotel. The first time I saw the room. The first time I saw the bright blue sky. The first time I had a glass of champagne. Now, the second glass of champagne is good, and the third and fourth and fifth and sixth are also good. But it's the first that produces a surprise signal, and it's the happy end, happy mirror image of the surprise signal when people lie, showing emotional arousal in a positive sense early on. Okay, let's do something. Let's show, not tell, shall we? I don't know how many of you heard that the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady, has decided to run for political office. Have you heard that? That the reason Brady said he's going to run for political office is he has strong commitments, and because he's been in the public eye for a while, he knows people. He said with self-deprecation, I'm a proven winner. And he said, I think I can serve my country, which I love so well. And that's why he's decided to go into politics. Okay, I just lied 3 times, maybe 4. And I did it for a purpose, which is that if people hear a misstatement twice, like a snail's heart is in its head, or if you have vitamin C a lot, you won't get colds at all, or something about politics, if people hear it more than once, it tends to be believed to be true. And this is one of the most powerful findings in neuroscience psychology, powerful in the sense that the effect is massive and it's really easy to demonstrate. There's only one group that doesn't show susceptibility to the illusory truth effect, and it's people with Alzheimer's because they don't remember. Everyone else, it works for. Why does it work? It has something to do with habituation. And I noticed this in real time in this room. When I said Brady was running for political office, the initial reaction on the part of you all was, in some cases, who's Tom Brady? But in other cases, what? Tom Brady's running for political office? But as I repeated it, the surprise signal went away, and it was very easy to process. So the human mind finds things that are challenging to process, a recipe for skeptical scrutiny, things that have been said twice, even if they're self-evidently false or not grounded in anything, they're processed like whoosh, and people tend to believe that they're true. Okay, the surprise signal is central both to the appreciation of good experiences and to the harsh negative reaction to bad experiences. Okay, this is going to be a true tale, or at least 3/4 true. Julia is a real person. Rachel is a composite of people that the authors know, so based on 3 people that we know. Both of them are fortunate. They have resources, and they have families, and they have a nice place to live. The problem is that Rachel is stultified in her life, and Julia isn't stultified at all. So their objective circumstances are in the same basic ballpark, but one of them skips each day, and the other is downcast, is struggling in life. What's going on with Julia? What makes her different from Rachel? It's a real quote. Because of her job, Rachel goes away from her home, which involves basically a standard family life with a nice place to live. And she says, when I come back, I feel it's resparkles. I go away and then it resparkles. If I was here for the last 18 years doing what I do all day, every day, it probably wouldn't still have pixie dust on it. Okay, Rachel doesn't go away and doesn't have the pixie dust. That's Julia. I said she was real. It's Julia Roberts, and that's a real quotation from her, saying that because of her job, she comes back and she's amazed by her life. Another actor, Jodie Roberts, subsequent to the publication of the book, said something very similar. She said that she was away filming, and she said, avocados are amazing. And she added, the gym's incredible. She said these were the things she was escaping when she went to play a part in a movie, and coming back, it's full of pixie dust. Okay, the midlife crisis is a problem all around the world. In some cases, it's a problem for people in their 40s, in some cases 50s, some cases in their 60s, but while not exactly uniform, it's regular. And the question is, how come? Here's a speculation that when you're 20 or 25 or 28, anything can happen in the next couple of months. The amount of learning is off the charts. You can fall in love tomorrow. You can have your heart broken on Saturday night. Something can happen that will completely change your life in an hour. And everything's wide open. It might be discombobulating, but it's full of color. And here's a way to think about the midlife crisis. Suppose this was discovered by a European scientist a couple hundred years ago. If you're looking at a cloud of colors and you're asked to stare at a fixed point in the middle, after about 30 seconds, the colors will all turn gray. If you're staring and you're not showing any movement in your head, you'll stop seeing the colors. They'll all turn gray. In fact, if you're really good at it, the colors will all turn white. You won't even see gray. It's just blank white. Now, for people in midlife crisis who are at 40 or 50 or 60, it's like that. They have good lives, they have good partners, many of them, but everything's gray, and that's a source of a form of depression. Okay, there was an old TV show called The Twilight Zone. How many of you have heard of it? Okay, basically all. Hooray, Rod Serling, the author. The most brilliant of all episodes is about a small-time criminal named Henry Valentine who basically spends his life as a thief, and he is shot by a police officer, and he wakes up, he's in a glorious seeming place, and there's an apparent angel to his right named Pip. And Pip says, "Mr. Valentine, what would you like?" He said, "What? I must be dead, and I'm in heaven? I was terrible. How did I get here?" And Pip says, "Whatever you want, anything you want." And Mr. Valentine says, I want to go gambling, and I want to win all the time. And he goes gambling, and he wins all the time. He says, "I want everyone to love me, especially women. I want women to love me." And all the women love him. He says, "I want to live in a spectacular place. Can I live in a spectacular place?" And Pip says, "Yes, here you go." And after a few weeks, Mr. Valentine is not liking it so much. He says to his angel, "This is horrible. Everything I want immediately comes true. I can't stand it anymore. It's unbearable. I want to go to the other place." And Pip looks at him and says, "Oh, Mr. Valentine, this is the other place." Okay, that's about habituation. A couple of years ago, I was at a wedding, and improbably at my dinner table was Esther Perel. I don't know if you know that name. She's a therapist and a theorist of marital grayness, of colorlessness in marriage. And she's an ominous presence at a wedding, though she's a super nice person. And I hadn't known much about her work until I got to sit across from her, and she's very willing to discuss her work, and so I learned about it there. And a summary of her line, what she's learned from therapy, is that fire needs air. So grayness in coupledom, she says, is a product of excessive proximity, where fire and magnetic energy turn into comfort, and that's good, but it can be a problem. So desire, she says, butts heads with habit and repetition. So she's studying in a very particular context what happens when the surprise signal is gone. In fact, she asked couples who were experiencing worrisome grayness, when did you last feel attracted to your partner? And a typical answer is, when I saw them across the room talking to somebody else. And the reason for that is when they do that, there's a surprise signal. They see the person as if they had gone away a bit, and there's some air. Okay, what do people care about? We know that if you ask people, the initial answer is likely to be people want to be happy, by which they mean they want to be joyful and smiling and having great experiences. That's not complete, as I learned from a professor turned public official in the Obama administration, whom I passed in the White House, and I asked him, "How are you?" which was meant as a really boring question, and the sought answer is fine, goodbye. But the answer I got instead was, well, in terms of happiness, on a scale of 0 to 10, I'm around 1. It's really terrible. I'm working so hard, we're all in these conflicts and we can't figure out a solution, and I'm not getting any sleep, and I'm miserable. But, and then he brightened, in the sense of meaning of my life, the feeling of purposefulness, on a scale of 0 to 10, it's 11. It's fantastic. I've never felt more purposeful in my life. And that suggests he, like all of us, I think, was willing to sacrifice something in the form of experience, well, happiness, for a sense that your life is meaningful. Now, there's a problem with both happiness and meaning, which is that they turn gray. I think with happiness, this is self-evident, that if you're doing something over and over and over again that makes you happy, you tend to habituate to it, and your experience of it diminishes in positive affect. It turns colorless. With meaning, it's also true that people who are engaged in, let's say, good works feel stunned at their good fortune, that they can do that at the first, but after 43 hours plus, the cancer research, or let's say the public interest lawyering, tends to get grayer than it was. There's some staggering research that's very recent suggesting what the social theorists have missed, and maybe some of the philosophers have missed, is that there's a third thing that people really care about, and they will sacrifice happiness and meaning for it, which is variety. That people will say, I'll give up in terms of smiles and a sense that I'm going to heaven if I can do 7 things in a decade rather than 1. If I can do things that don't make me particularly happy and are not particularly meaningful but are different, I'll take that. And what there's an intuitive awareness of is that psychological richness, which is a mildly abominable phrase. Yes, richness doesn't feel quite, feels a little precious, that word in this context, but we get the idea about variety, that what people get is that they won't habituate to variety. You won't. You can't, because it's by definition different. Okay, here are 2 lessons from good experiences. Suppose there's a great song by Taylor Swift on her new album, and the great song by Taylor Swift is redundant. We don't need the word great. Song by Taylor Swift, great, is implicit. So let's suppose we have a great song and it's 7 minutes long, and it's amazing. It's like All Too Well, but better and faster even, and a little less sad. Do you want to hear the 7 minutes all the way through, or do you want to break it up? Okay, I won't call for a show of hands, but we have data which is upwards of 90% of people think that's an easy question. They want to hear it all the way through. But if people are asked about their experience, hearing it all the way through or having it chopped up in the middle, they have a better experience when it's chopped up in the middle. And this is true for massages as well as for music. People like it better if it's sliced in the middle or in 3 parts. And the reason is that if you have it sliced in the middle, you dishabituate, like Julia Roberts, and you come back to the song being amazed. Now, if it's Taylor Swift, you're going to be amazed all the way through. But 4 minutes in, you're going to be less amazed than you were in minute 1 or 2, and the breaking up actually improves the experience. Bad experiences, like cleaning up a room or dealing with an unpleasant client, counterintuitively, those are ones which you should motor through. And the reason is that dealing with an unpleasant client or cleaning up a room gets less bad as you undergo it, you habituate to it. Personal story, shall I tell you? A few years ago, my wife was given a job in New York, and I couldn't bear New York. It was so noisy and crowded. To get from one street to another was to be, your ears, and it wasn't music, it was terribleness. And there are so many people, the pedestrian traffic. So in desperation, I called a friend and said, what am I going to do? I can't stand New York. And he said, you're going to habituate. It's going to be okay. And I said to my friend, who was a psychologist, this wasn't a friend, this wasn't a therapeutic situation, it wasn't that bad. But he said, you're going to habituate. And I said, New York's not going to change. And he said, I know, but you are. So he was right, of course, saying that there would be diminished sensitivity to what was not so good. And that's wise. Okay, so in business and in government, lying is something to which some people habituate. And the mechanism is just the same as described. And the question is what to do about it. Okay, so leaking in government is a thing. I remember in one of my 3 government stints, someone said, leak and you're fired. Someone in a position of authority. It was pretty tough, yes, leak and you're fired. But everyone remembered that. And I'm sure the person who said that didn't think every leak was worth the death penalty, but thought it was very important for people's amygdala to be on fire if they even contemplated leaking. So with respect to misconduct, including criminal misconduct, nipping it in the bud has a social science neurological logic to it. And the reason is that people won't start to habituate to their own wrongdoing. Okay, here's something about creativity in law and elsewhere. I'm not sure how many of you know about the Fosbury flop. There was a guy named Dick Fosbury who was a would-be athlete. The problem was he wasn't that amazing in sports, and he wanted to do really well, and he did okay, but not what he wanted. And he decided to be a high jumper, and he wasn't great at the high jump, so he thought, I have an idea. Let's go over the back rather than the stomach, and let's not run straight. Let's do a J run. And he was ridiculed by all who thought that this was the most peculiar thing. It doesn't look so peculiar because we've habituated to what Fosbury inaugurated. People stopped laughing when he started winning some competitions, but they still thought it was ridiculous. They really stopped laughing when he won the United States high jumping competition, and when he set the world record at the Olympic Games, the laughter died down for admiration. What was going on with Fosbury? He was an engineer as well as an aspiring athlete. He was not habituated to the way of doing the high jump, and he discovered something very different. Once other people copied him, his athletic skills weren't off the charts, so he didn't win anymore. But he was able to be creative by virtue of the fact that he was looking from a distance at the practice that he was attempting to engage in. My colleague, as a writer at least, and for a long time at the University of Chicago, Dick Thaler, I think is Dick Fosbury's brother from another mother. That is his invention of behavioral economics, and more than anyone, he's responsible for it, came from the fact that, as he said, he wasn't particularly good at math. So a little like Fosbury, he wasn't going to do great unless he innovated. And he drew on psychology, where Fosbury drew on his knowledge of engineering to come up with something radically different. And there are kind of mundane illustrations of Fosbury-ification or Thalerification, which is data suggests astoundingly that if you stand up and walk around a little bit, when you're stuck on a task, you tend to be more creative for approximately 6 minutes. But that 6 minutes can make all the difference. And it's because people are getting a distance from where they were. Okay, here's a true story about 2 stylized people. So it's true meaning they're composites of people. John, when COVID hit, felt battered psychologically, thinking, what's life going to be like in a world where I have to be at home all the time? That's going to be intolerable. And Jane felt exactly the same way. There was an initial month of really low in terms of measured well-being. But after a month, Jane got better, and after a month, John didn't get better. And John stayed in a trough basically for the duration of the COVID situation, and Jane was basically fine. Okay, most of the world on the data we have was like Jane, but some people were like John. And the question is, what distinguishes them? It's that John suffered from chronic anxiety, and mental illnesses are characterized by difficulty in habituating. So people who have obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorders, depression, and schizophrenia all are defined by much less in the way of habituation. That's not the only thing they're defined by, but it's a shockingly recurrent characteristic and a response to obsessive compulsive disorder. Someone in my family has it, so I know something about this, is to exposure therapy, where people get exposed again and again and again to the thing that causes their symptoms. And that's a way of trying hard in a context where habituation is difficult to produce some, and it works. Okay, so habituation causes resilience, which makes it a blessing, not a curse, though I'm focusing on the downside. Students who get a not so good grade, many, they're just fine in short order. Some aren't, and that's because they ruminate and keep thinking about it, and rumination is associated with some mental illnesses. Okay, now let's talk, shall we, about some bad things. This pig is having some rain fall on it. That was AI, by the way. AI decided to produce the pig with the rain when I put bad things in, not the worst choice. Cruelty, meanness, authoritarianism, and misinformation. Those are 4 bad things. Americans seem habituated to misinformation in the sense the percentage you say it's okay for politicians to lie is up to about 2/3, where it was well under half a few short years ago. Okay, so the question is, how do those things, those bad things, become possible and sustain themselves? And you can take your pick of things that we're living with now to which people, including all of us, have become habituated just by diminished sensitivity to the stimulus, and that future generations might think, how on earth did they live with that? Okay, so there's Hitler. For this book, my co-author and I did some work on contemporaneous accounts of Hitler. And the historical accounts that I think are the most interesting aren't the retrospectives by, astoundingly brilliant historians, though they are amazing, but they're contemporaneous accounts. And in one of them, there was a guy of German heritage who went back to Germany and talked to a bunch of former Nazis, not people who were, this is the 1950s, not people who were actively engaged in stuff pursuant to, they're just Nazis. And he found, the book is charming and kind of upbeat, implausibly in a way. He said what he found is he liked all of them, every single one. They became his friends. And he wondered what happened. And here's what one of the contemporaneous people said, which is continuous with what he learned from his friends. He said, we had no time to think about these dreadful things that were growing little by little all around us. What was happening was the gradual habituation of the people, so he actually used the word, little by little. Each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or on occasion regretted, that people could no more see it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing. One day it is over his head. So the basic idea is when governments start to deteriorate, it's not as if on day one it's what it grows into. On day one it's different and it's bad. And people are like the people in the lying experiment. They habituate to the thing. And that means by the time it's a horror, their surprise signal is off, like the people at the end of the day in the lies experiment. There's a famous experiment by a guy named Milgram who wanted to understand this, who tried to study obedience to authority, where the basic idea is, when will people do terrible things to strangers? And what he discovered is people will administer a very severe electric shock to people if someone in a position of authority instructs them to. And so he thought what he discovered was The real problem is people's surprise signal or something is turned off when someone asks them to do something, even if it's awful. That's undoubtedly a large part of the picture, but Milgram's famous experiments were actually experiments in habituation. They were even better experiments than his exposition showed, because they didn't go right from 0 to 70. They started with a little tiny electric shock that didn't hurt at all. Then it hurt a tiny bit, then it hurt a little, then it kind of ouch, and it gradually went up. So people were habituated by the design of the experiment to their own cruelty. Okay, we need a category of dishabituation entrepreneurs. And many lawyers are dishabituation entrepreneurs. I'll tell you my own little experience in being subjected to dishabituation entrepreneurship pretty recently. I'm on the board of a school, and in the school we have trustees meetings, and in the trustees meetings we were asked to do an exercise where we saw a Red Cross poster, a real Red Cross poster, of cool and not cool descriptions of kids at a swimming pool. So it's a poster. It looks like something you'd see up at Harvard or something if there were kids going to the swimming place. And it would show one kid is splashing water and say not cool, and then show another kid who was swimming peacefully and it would say cool, and there were like 6 of them or 8 of them or something. And the person who was doing this little exercise said, "Do you notice anything about the poster?" And we all said no. He said, "Look at it. Is there anything funny about the poster? Anything surprising?" I said, "No." And then finally, one person in the group, who was a woman of color, said, "The people who are doing the not cool things, they're all black. The white kids are all doing the cool things. What is it with this poster?" It was a terrible poster, but was in a way more terrible was she was the only one to notice. And this is a real poster. This wasn't made up. This was the Red Cross's real poster. And when they were informed by someone, "What are you doing here?" they thought, "Oh my gosh, we didn't mean anything," which is probably true, and yet. Okay, Martin Luther King was a dishabituation entrepreneur in the sense that he said, particularly to white people, but also to people of color, look. This system of segregation in his early days that you're living with, register a surprise signal at that. And that completely worked. An occasional teacher at Harvard, Catherine McKinnon, is a lawyer, dishabituation entrepreneur. I hope she'd forgive me for saying that. She's a friend and a hero. Her book on sexual harassment of working women, I kind of remember this in real time, was written when the term sexual harassment was not on the general lawyer or public view screen. It may be that she invented it. She certainly was its principal theorist. And her book, Sexual Harassment of Working Women, was a radical book at the time. It wasn't a mainstream book. And it tried to earn its radicalism, meaning to habituate the legal system to the profoundly dishabituating thesis through 2 strategies. First, it said, if a woman is sexually harassed, it's highly likely that she's been discriminated against on the basis of sex, because if she were a man, that wouldn't have happened. So the claim is a 1964 law that forbids discrimination on the basis of sex self-evidently applies if someone is sexually harassed when they wouldn't have been sexually harassed were they not female. Now, I guess it could be said that if you had an extremely peculiar supervisor who was, just determined to sexually harass everyone, that was like that supervisor's thing, that person wouldn't be a sex discriminator. But that's not the usual pattern. Okay, so what she did was first develop a theory, but second, very powerfully, offered narratives. And you couldn't read the narratives, which were real, of people's experience with sexual harassment without being gripped by the thought, what kind of a world is it such that this kind of thing happens? Shall I tell you a story a little bit? It's a very personal story, but it's a story that I only thought of just in the last couple of days in connection with this, which is in the mid-'80s, maybe mid or late '80s. I was reading McKinnon and starting to write a little bit about some of the issues that she put on the agenda. And my mother called me every Sunday for our usual chat, and she said, "What are you working on?" She would often ask. And I said, "I'm working on feminism." And she said, "No, so you don't work on that." I said, "It's interesting. There's a lot of law stuff now." She said, no, that's terrible. You do constitutional law and administrative law. You don't work on that." And it got heated. It got terrible. And my mother was fierce. And she said, "You do not work on that. That's awful. Don't." And I'm her son, so when she got like that, I knew what to do, which is you have to fight fire with fire. And so I got mad at her in return, and I started talking about what McKinnon and others were saying and talking about sexual harassment. And then she said 3 words. First, she paused for maybe 7 seconds, and my mother never paused. And then she said 3 words that she never said to her only son before or after. It's the only time in her life she said these 3 words. She said with a lot of colors, she said, "God bless you." And in those words, there was a narrative of her own life, which I'm sure no one except my dad knew about. She had a good life. But what I told her about, she was saying with those words, "I know, and you have no idea." Okay, so she was outside of habituation then. Okay, so here are some lessons. If we're lucky, as I hope everyone in this room is, I travel between Boston and DC every week, so Harvard seems to me, there's so much pixie dust, it's unbelievable. Cambridge, I can't imagine how it can resparkle so much. Imaginative and real breaks can change everything. Dishabituation can induce psychological richness. Innovation is often spurred by breaks of one kind or another, or from being induced to see things from very different angles. Breaking up good things is counterintuitively in the interest of the agent, you, me, and breaking up bad things is tempting, but let's clean up the room entirely tonight. A pervasive problem for people with mental health issues is challenges in habituating, which impairs the capacity for resilience. And a story from, I think it came up even in that meeting, when President Obama was confronted with advisors whose solutions to large-scale problems seemed meager in comparison to the size of the problems. So the advisors would be in the Oval Office, and we'd have like 6 solutions, and the problem might be immigration or war and peace or climate change or criminal violence, and the solutions wouldn't be matched to the problem. And someone in the room would show that by words or by downcast look. And what he'd say, like kind of the best father you could ever imagine, he'd look at the group with fondness and say, "Better is good," meaning maybe you can't solve the problem, but maybe you can help the lives of a couple thousand people. Better is good. That's the project of Dishabituation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sunstein. We are going to move to our audience Q&A now for a few minutes. If you have a question for Professor Sunstein, please raise your hand, and my colleague Sarah and I are coming around with microphones. If you're joining us on Zoom today, you can use the chat, the Q&A function in Zoom, and my colleague will read the question aloud on your behalf.
I just have a technical question about your example of the counterintuitive effect of breaking up something good and pausing. In both of your instances, I can't imagine the natural way that that would happen. Like, would you get off the massage table and go walk down the hall, or would you have to go to the bathroom, so you press pause, and you come back and you hear the rest of the song? Like, what is a more substantial example of what you mean?
Okay, entertainment can have intermissions. Concerts can have intermissions. Television shows can have advertisements. I'm wondering whether there's data on whether people like shows better if they're advertisements. Maybe, and counterintuitively it's so. And for many good experiences, we have an ability to break it up. If you're watching the show Constellation on TV, which I hope you are, you and me both, maybe all of us, we're uniform Constellation fans. You can't wait for the right episode. That's exactly right. And which means if you saw the next episode right after the previous episode, welfare would go down. Yeah. I mean, of course you're right that there are some things that breaking up the experience is not practical to do. I'm thinking that in my seminar, I take a break after an hour plus, which pains me greatly, but it's probably a good idea, and not just because of biological needs.
Hey, Professor Sunstein, thank you for the talk. It was amazing. Just one thing, you were talking about how it's actually good for you to sometimes go through tests that aren't enjoyable, like, for example, cleaning your house. But that made me think, what about things that you don't enjoy, but that are actually good for you, such as, for example, studying math? Is getting habituated to it something good or something bad because you don't pay enough attention to what you're studying?
Well, okay, that's a good point. So if keeping going makes you diminish your focus on the task and you're tired, you maybe should take a break. So driving for 14 hours, it might be that the third hour is, if you don't like driving much, you're used to it, it's not so bad, but to take a break at some point is good so you don't crash. So a trade-off between diminishing performance or gain from the experience and reduced negative affect associated with the experience. And I'll say something about law and policy. So in places where there isn't a lot of freedom, the valuation of freedom on the part of population as a component of well-being is very low, lower than anywhere else. In places where health care isn't very good, the valuation of health care as an ingredient of well-being is very low. So people habituate to really bad things. And Tocqueville had a great description of how to evaluate this. He said, shall I call it a blessing of God or a last malediction of his anger? That's very precise because it's not clear how to think about it. I opt for malediction of his anger. But the utilitarians in the room might not agree.
Is this on? So I've got 3 questions. First, is it true that having more and multiple activities makes us feel better because it expands on our sense of time? Along with that is variety the spice of life, and then a little bit more on the politics. In our current political situation, sorry, I'm getting feedback, how do we best promote dishabituation and to lying and misinformation?
That's great. So on the first question, I don't know about I don't know of any data on that question. On promoting dishabituation to lying and misinformation, things that retain the surprise signal. So what are those things? To obtain a critical distance from the practice, even if it's widespread. So it might be just vivid tales of the bad thing that make people think, my gosh. It might be comparing one situation to another situation, where the situation to which it's compared is one without misinformation. The fact that Americans are more okay with political lying now, a higher percent than in the recent past, that's, I think, a dishabituating fact. I mean, one thing that may be an implication, okay, so you know about the illusory truth effect. It has a sibling called truth bias. So if you go to a town and ask, how do I get to the gas station? Someone says, go left, then go a mile up, then go right, you can't miss it. You'll probably do that, and you won't think the person's lying. So when we hear things, this worked for my Tom Brady example, it didn't seem like you thought, why is he lying to us about the greatest quarterback who ever lived? It's not a mean lie about Tom Brady, but it's still a lie. It's that people tend to think statements made are true. That's just how the human mind works, and there's probably an evolutionary explanation both for truth bias and for the illusory truth effect. Back in hunter-gatherer societies, if everyone's running from a tiger, you don't think, well, maybe there isn't a tiger. You run. That's the illusory truth effect in action. But for social media providers to rely on the marketplace of correction has a psychological downside. And one thing that Tali Sharot, the co-author of the book, did was she changed a like button in an experiment for a trust button. So a trust button. You can press trust. And that had all sorts of good effects on circulation of falsehoods. Both things that were false got circulated less, and people posted fewer false things because they didn't want to get the not trust button pushed. They wanted the trust button.
Thank you very much. This actually, we couldn't have asked for a better last talk for the last book talk on our series, and it ended on a high note. Please give another round of applause.
Thank you all.
So as I said, this concludes our book talk series for spring 2024, and we expect to see you back for our book talk series in fall 2024 later this year. Everyone have a wonderful day.